Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Frontrunners Innovate. But today's episode of our podcast begins a new series of Frontrunners Innovate called Working Conversations. Now, the goal of Working Conversations is to bring up in international and often intergenerational context important conversations with subject matter experts. My panelists are always going to be members of my Youth Commons group, primarily youth leaders from Africa, all with organizations and enterprises of their own and rich in global impact-oriented experience. So for this conversation, we're going to focus on how cultural intelligence impacts the issues most important to young leaders creating impact in different continents. Our special guest is Julia Gaspar Bates, president of Intercultural Alliances, which is based in the Washington, D.C. area. Cultural understanding with a business and organizational perspective is her specialty, but there's so much more to Julia's bio. As a senior consultant with the World Bank Group, she's likely to have very much to share with our young leaders. So please welcome everyone to this conversation. I want to begin with getting you introduced to our Youth Commons panelists. So let's start with Tobias Naruki. Tobias, why don't you share just a little bit about who you are?
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm really grateful to meet Miss Julia and my colleagues here, Victor, Sadia, and Jerem. And thank you so much, Miss Mary, for hosting this very important podcast. My name is Tobias Naruki. I'm from the Republic of Kenya. Just to speak briefly about who I am, I'm the founding president and CEO of Africa International Policy Research Center. This is a think tank based in Nairobi, Kenya, working across the continent. I've had an opportunity to work with the First Ladies of Africa under the organization of the African First Ladies. And also, I've had an opportunity to be a part of the International Observer Missions. I've just left Hungary right now after the 12th April elections, which was very successful. I'm proud to be a part of the youth frontrunners under Miss Mary, our patron and mentor. And through the young people's thinking, learning, and readiness to explore, it gives me an opportunity and honor to listen to Miss Julia, to grasp the experience, and also be a part of her journey of the story that she has that is so inspiring to touch lives like us who are looking forward to grow and not only just develop, but also inspire and help other young entrepreneurs across the continent of Africa. Lastly, I'm here to learn and to explore how best Miss Julia's experience would be able to help me and be able to inspire me and open opportunities for myself, the continent of Africa's young generation, and the whole world. Thank you so much, Mary, for the opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you, Tobias. Jerem, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Mary, for such an exchange program that you've always successfully organized for us to change ideas, explore and have exploitative ideas from across the globe. That is the kind of globalization that enriches us with much that we need to empower our communities. My name is Jerem Onguru. I'm an African from Kenya. Currently, I'm the founder of Global Agency for Community Acceleration. That is GACA. GACA is an organization that is founded to empower vulnerable youths from all walks of life in my struggling communities here in Kenya. Apart from that, I'm the author of the Breaking the Poverty Bond in Africa book. That book just gives the poverty index in Africa, while also highlighting some of the actionable solutions that we need to take as a nation and as a people to break through from all forms of poverty, be it mind poverty, be it the period poverty. That is always our flagship project, where we want to try to empower vulnerable young girls that go into a classroom without sanitary pads. Some of them go wrapped in papers, some of them wrapped in ragged clothes. An interpretation of this is that their self-esteem is lowered, self-confidence is lowered, and this will result to a poor result. So we end up giving poor results or poor grades to poor young girls who should get a quality grade, so that in future they could be married to change the status quo of their struggling families. So I'm very much proud of this organization, and I'll be very much eager and waiting to hear from our chief guest today, that is Madam Julia, so that with that, we can explore grounds and commonalities and ideas that we can embrace as a people and as the young leaders of Africa, so that that can steer us forward in terms of development and giving us sustainability with the projects that we do. That is a brief of myself today. Thank you so much, and I'm waiting to hear more from the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, Sadia, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary, and a very warm welcome to Julia as well. My name is Sadia Muritala. I'm from Nigeria, from Africa, but currently I live in the United Kingdom in Edinburgh, Scotland. I am the founder of the Weekend African Development. It's an initiative that builds competitive global digital skills for young people across Africa, including refugees as well. What we basically do is we build their skills and then we connect them to organizations across Africa and the United States and the United Kingdom for them to go into internship and opportunity. And we've been able to do this largely with the support of Mary. So Mary, this is me saying thank you again. So this is what I do currently with my work. I'm largely about employment for young people and skills development. And I'm really looking forward to have a conversation and ask just very few questions. So Julia, thank you so much.
Victor, you're up.
Hello. Thank you, Mary. Pleasure to be here. My name is Victor George, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the United States. I'm founder of Ethics Air Consulting, and so where we provide AML governance, ethical governance, policy procedures within anti-money laundering as well as anti-corruption. And this is working in the U.S., EU, and especially now for emerging markets. So this is very personal now for me within Africa because I say my family name is from Angola. My family ties, George, goes back 8th great grandfather, Peter George. He was from Angola and he came to the United States in 1650. And so, my family has been here tied in North Carolina for, was it now 300 years? So, this is a very important part for me, very personal, as well as just professional. So excited to hear from Julia and hear what she has to share and learn more about her experience and where those matters are to help us support those solutions that we can all bring together.
Thank you. Julia, we have an interesting situation. Tobias is getting ready to board right now and has sent me a message in chat to ask if he can go ahead and ask a question of you before you even introduce yourself. So why not?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your consideration, Mary, and for your understanding, Miss Julia. I have one question. Many young people today struggle to be able to align with the cultural values from within their professional lines of engagement when they get employment and be able to balance with intergenerational multicultural practices, especially in the 21st century where technology has taken over. What do you think could be the solution to be able to help the young people, especially in development today? We are founders of institutions, but balancing founding the institution, managing the institution, and the multicultural aspects of dealing with your fellow peer young people has become a struggle. I know with your experience, you will help us to understand. What do you think is the solution towards this thing?
Well, that's a great question. And I'll introduce myself afterwards, but let me respond to that because I'm actually seeing in a lot of my work the generational cultural differences coming up very strong. And I'm going to sort of start with a caveat that, oftentimes my work has really been about working across national cultures. And when I first entered the field, that's specifically how it was. However, culture is much more intersectional. And particularly, I think that in the intercultural field that I am a part of, we really don't just look at that in a monolithic way anymore. And I would say that one of the big areas that I'm seeing in my work with a variety of different clients is the generational cultural differences. And in fact, I've been asked to deliver a number of workshops on those as well, because there's a huge gap. There's 5 generations now in the workplace, or 4, depending on where one may work. And, you know, there's a big gap, particularly, I think, with people who were raised and born in the digital age, in terms of how their brain functions. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, it's fascinating to see the speed in which things have taken shape because of technology. You know, I see that with my own daughter. I see it, you know, in my work. I see it with my clients. And I think that that is one area that is still being navigated. I don't think that there's a clear-cut answer to many of these questions that you'll probably ask, because it's human dynamics and human behavior. However, I think that what's important is to recognize the values that the different generations bring into work. And I'll just give an example of some of the things that I see globally. Okay, I mean, you know, I'm based here in the United States, but I'm hearing this with clients in India. I'm hearing this with clients in, you know, working in Africa and in Europe and whatnot, is that there's flatter hierarchies, for example, with some of the younger generations than with the older generations. And that can create a little bit more of a gap sometimes in terms of aligning those different expectations. I think that there's also tends to be a little bit more informality in the communication, along with those hierarchy, how we're using names, how we're addressing people with titles. Now, I know that some of you were probably working with ministers and, you know, with government officials where those hierarchical lines may still be existing, but they're becoming more blurred with younger people, certainly in how technology is used and the rapidity. And I'm seeing that a lot with like global teams. You know, I think that in fact, this morning I was just delivering a workshop for a client on communicating across cultures. And one of the challenges with that is, what is the best mode of communication, right? I mean, here we are right now with Zoom in different parts of the world. We can click a button and see people across time zones, across, you know, thousands of kilometers of distance. And yet that was on a, you know, not even conceivable, you know, 30 years ago. So what is the preference of communication as well that we have? And what we're finding sometimes is that some of the younger generations are much more adept at just sending an SMS, you know, a text message via WhatsApp or something, versus having that engagement in terms of face-to-face communication. So how does that filter the communications? You know, I mean, I think this is a huge topic that we could probably spend days just discussing, but hopefully that responded to a few of your question, Tobias.
I think he's having a board right now, but right. I think he got most of that. Yeah, but this is being recorded, so we can definitely make sure he gets it. You're so right about that. Oh, there he goes. Tobias is with us. He's with us in spirit. I think, you know, it's funny when you say about the differences. The first thing I noticed when I started working globally is so many of my African friends, and you all are here, is WhatsApp is the preference. When I make an introduction, made one this morning between 2 African young ladies, and they went, I did it by email, but they went immediately to WhatsApp to meet with each other. So please take a little bit of time and just get us up to speed on how you got into this very interesting path.
So, well, first of all, I want to just also, you know, really appreciate the panelists as well, and the richness of the work that you're all doing. So really, you know, happy to be here with you all today. So I guess I could say I was sort of an interculturalist from birth. I mean, it sort of started maybe unwittingly at birth. I was born in London, grew up in a bicultural family, British mother, American father, moved to the States and grew up in Maine, which is the east coast of the United States, and the northeasternmost state just north of Boston. But I think because I had the opportunity to travel, because half of my family was in the UK, probably didn't realize it at the time, but was learning those cultural differences from an early stage. You know, I was told, my sisters and I were told how we had to behave at the dinner table when we go back to England, which was, you know, much more formal. And so I had to sort of develop those skills. And then we traveled, you know, mostly to continental Europe at the time as well. And that just gave me a desire to learn other languages. I mean, I started learning languages when I was 12. I realized that if I was going to learn about another culture, I also had to speak the languages. So I did my undergraduate degree in French and in Italian. I studied in both of those countries. And at the time, I was still a European citizen because it was pre-Brexit. So right after college, I moved to Paris, and I spent the first 8 years or so of my career living and working there, and really learning on a much deeper level, which I'm continuing to do because I'm actually co-writing a book with somebody there right now, and I just got back last week. How profound cultural differences are. I mean, even in the co-writing of our book, my co-author and I are finding them surfacing very, very regularly, and it's great because we both are interculturalists and we both have the language to discuss, and we both understand each other's culture very, very well. So it just shows how the depth of which cultural differences can really show up in terms of how we work. But I've been working in this field for many years. When I moved back to the States, I went to graduate school in intercultural relations, and then I've lived in a couple of countries in South America, in Mexico, and in Ecuador since then as well. And then I've been really working globally, co-founded my company in 2002, but really discovered the intercultural field by happen chance, because my real interest was just learning about other cultures and traveling and seeing the world and learning other languages. And all of a sudden I realized, wow, there's a profession I can do this. So it was really just, it fell into place from, I worked for years in industry, and I was doing a lot of global business and negotiation and traveling, and sometimes stumbling and having faux pas. And so it was really kind of a natural sequence from my own experience of having lived in different countries and having to navigate that. And also, just helping, my own stumbling as well, sometimes doing work across cultures, and then just realizing, this is really what I want to be doing, is helping other people. And so my work really gives me the opportunity to work with so many different, from international development organizations, like Mary mentioned earlier, the World Bank, to working in educational institutions and universities, in corporate environments, in some NGOs. I've worked with the military, really just helping people. And I think that Mary and I have had this conversation before, but I feel like today, the urgency of this work is much more pronounced because of what's going on in the world. So it's always been very personal to me, but I feel like now that there's an even deeper calling, because we're dealing with so much of the othering in the world and so much lack of understanding. So I feel that that's we're at a critical juncture point right now, that if people don't find ways of coming together as humans, despite the cultural differences that we have, which are real, then, how are we going to move forward, in the strife that we're seeing?
Right. I think from my perspective, being that bridge is really a key thing. It's important to understand who we are. We're all here together. We're all on one planet, So understanding each other is key. I want to ask who has a question for Ms. Julia. Victor, did you say something?
Yes. Julia, I have a question regarding this, because when you say about the intercultural differences, one part I've done with research on between men and women, how we think and how we come together on solutions. And one of the things I've helped with regulations is put it in a sports context versus someone with women may look at things from a collaboration, where men is a little bit more competitive, maybe same outcome, but different ways of pulling and tying together, like how much of the conceptualizing the information is, has been part, right now, what you're working on and focusing on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm a gender issue specialist, but I certainly, that comes up a lot. And for myself, having done business in so many different parts of the world as a woman, I've certainly seen that as a challenge as well, in terms of different relationships towards women in different cultures as well, and not necessarily understanding that. So I think that it does play a huge part. I mean, it's, I try to avoid saying men are competitive and women are collaborative, because I think that there's both. And I've seen very competitive women, I've seen extremely collaborative men. And we can look at sort of tendencies around, culture, which is what I typically talk about. But I will say that I think that women are strongly relationship oriented, not to say that men are not, but I think that focus on building that and nurturing that sometimes can be a little bit more pronounced, just if we're looking at genders. And again, by no shape or form am I saying that that's an either or. Whereas I think that sometimes there's a little bit more of that transactional focus in terms of working, like, okay, let's get down to it. And that's not necessarily the case everywhere either. I think that in many cultures, building that strong rapport and that strong relationship is critical across genders. I mean, it surpasses that. But I would say that there's significant differences in terms of how business is conducted across genders, in terms of the credibility that one may have, you know, as a woman in certain cultures. And I've certainly experienced that myself. So the pressures to establish oneself, I mean, that can be everywhere, but I think that it's even more pronounced in some cultures. And so navigating that, and I have a newsletter blog post on my website all about women working globally. If you're interested, I'll try to put it in the chat box during this, but that might be of interest.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would love to, and I agree too with you as far as broadening the scopes, or sometimes it can be stereotypes of how men
Yeah.
and women think. As shared with, there were some studies that had just geared to sometimes the conceptualizing that can take misunderstanding. But no, I thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to your point too, I think that what is challenging is we never know what's going on in somebody else's mind, right? I mean, I think that that's important, and you know, and this can be across any culture, whether it's national culture, gender culture, generational culture. You brought up those three so far today, but I think that for me, it's really about how do we find that common point? You know, how do we ask those questions in a way to really understand what the other's perspective is? And I think that conceptually, you know, thinking about that in terms of brain functioning, there's a good book called The Female Brain as well that I really thought was so fascinating, because it really sort of explains the sociocultural, and I can't remember the author's name, it was written a number of years ago, but it really explains sort of the sociocultural phenomena that's also biological. So yeah.
And thank you so much.
Sadia, do you have a question?
Actually, I was going to ask, you did mention the work you do is very important around culture and getting people to integrate together. I was just wondering if you have any idea as to where most you can have impact with what is going on around the world. And if you've thought around what challenge and support you would need.
Mm. Yeah. So believe me, I've been giving this a great question, Sadia. I've been giving this a lot of thought. And I think that one of the challenges that we have, you know, maybe I'll preface this by saying that I guess it was 2 years ago, I was presenting at a conference in France, an intercultural conference, and was talking about, you know, all of the global crises that we're facing today. And a friend of mine had come from Kyiv, also an interculturalist, and I had written a case study that was based on a number of interviews that I conducted with leaders working in countries that are kind of considered conflict violent or fragile countries, to really get their perspectives. And I'd written some fictitious case studies, two of which were being presented in my presentation that I was co-presenting with two colleagues. And one of them was on a team that had Russian and Ukrainian members, as well as people from other parts of Eastern Europe and in East Asia. And my friend stood up and she said, this case study traumatized me. And I think that it was a really rich conversation. And she and I had actually planned to have lunch afterwards. But I think one of the things that for me was highlighted is the trauma that people are facing right now. And my husband's actually a psychologist and is a trauma expert. So we've had a lot of discussion about this. And this is an area of research that I'm really, really interested in, not myself understanding, you know, the whole context of it, but seeing that that's part of what's going on in our world today. And how do we transcend when there's trauma? You know, when we look at the conflict going on in the Middle East right now, or in Ukraine, or in Sudan, or in the CDR, you know, so many different countries, how do we bridge that to help transcend that so that people can see eye to eye again and come together? And I'm not quite sure. I'm not a conflict resolution specialist, but I do feel that on a more micro level, one of the things that I'm trying to do is listening circles, which are based, and I don't know if people are familiar with them, but they're rooted in Indigenous practices. And I've been doing them for a professional organization that I'm involved in. And then I've just been doing them through my own network, and really trying to bring voices together via Zoom, where we have different perspectives. Certainly in the United States right now, there's a lot of political divisions that are going on. How do we get people to talk to each other again? How do we get people to listen to each other? And it's not always easy. You know, we reverted into our different echo chambers. And when there's conflict, when there's strife, it's very difficult to do that. So those are are some of the ways that I feel like both, aspirationally of what I want to be doing in terms of research, particularly when I'm finished with my book and seeing if we can get a grant to do this with my husband, but also and I have, friends in Ukraine and also in Rwanda. So even looking at post-conflict and on genocide and how the restoration is between people, but also just to get people to really listen. And I think that that's not what we're doing enough. So that's one small, humble way I'm trying to do that for whoever wants to come. And I'm happy to include you in. I'm going to be scheduling the next listening circle soon. So if people are interested in joining, would love to have you join as well.
It's great. I'm happy to.
That's fantastic. What a
Yes.
great idea. Yeah. Jerome, do you have a question?
Sure. Thank you, Julia. I'm really happy to just hear your narration, what you do, how much you've interacted with different cultures. And I've got two questions to ask. You can always realize or appreciate that once we talk here on matters intercultural biasness or it is that we normally have, at some point we integrate, but this doesn't take time. You'll realize that this relationship that we are building from different cultures, at some point it now erodes. So what are these measures do you think that we can bring on board so that we have got a solid relationship that can stay for a longer without erosion after some few weeks or maybe years? I know you can have this, and you can also tell us some of the insights or the deep insight that you've interacted with on your exploration with different cultures. Again, my second question could be little bit out of the scope, but when you travel, you interact and being exposed to a lot of ideas and projects that different cultures does. Like example, that many African nations or many African leaders, we try to come up with very brilliant ideas. But at the end of the day, it fails at the implementation stage because there is no sustainable ways to meet or maybe to meet the goals that we wish to meet. So what do you think in terms of matters sustainability of the project that we do have?
Yeah. So I think that there's a connection between both of your questions. I mean, I think one of them is also more on a material side too, although I'd say persistence, right? But I think that from a cultural standpoint, how do we sustain those relationships? I mean, it's not easy to start building a relationship. I know myself when I worked in industry, for example, and I was told, okay, go here and set this up and get this contract signed. It doesn't work like that in many parts of the world. I can't just go to Kenya probably and say, okay, great, Jerome, let's sit down, let's discuss this business transaction. We need to develop a rapport. We need to develop trust. You have to know who I am. Maybe I need to know who you are and who your family is and other factors as well. I mean, it varies from one culture to the next. It's not a one size fits all. I think that, I always tell people, do your cultural due diligence before you go someplace, right? You're not going to know everything about a culture, but so much of my work is about helping, starting with self-awareness and then knowledge and then skills, right? So that if I'm going to Kenya, where I've been sort of close to the border, I guess I have been to Tanzania and climbed Kilimanjaro, so I was very, very close to the Kenyan border, but not in Kenya specifically. But if I'm going to Kenya, I need to do some research, right? I need to know what are some of those expectations that I need to have. And I also need to be grounded in what are my own expectations, right? And I think that when we go that, the problem that a lot of people have is that we kind of go in, and especially if we're working on the same team, for example, we're working with colleagues in a different office in a different part of the world, we might just assume that we can kind of behave as we do because we're, the point is the project that we're working on. And that's not the case. And it's really easy. There's a quote that I read once that's saying that trust is built in drops and it's lost in buckets, right? It takes like a split second to lose trust. And thinking about this, right? You're building it very slowly. And one incident, which sometimes could have a cross-cultural implication, can cause that loss. Now, can you rebuild it? Yes, but it takes a lot more effort and work. And if you're doing it in an environment where you're not able to see the person on a day-to-day, face-to-face basis, it can be even more challenging. So I think that understanding how trust is built and relationships are built in those different cultures, and the amount of time is really important to do that, so that we are able to, navigate that sometimes rocky road. It's not always a linear path, but to really reflect on that. It might mean doing certain things that are out of our comfort zone. I mean, I know many people, are eating foods, for example, that they feel that they not would normally eat or drink or things like that, because that's the hospitality is very important. I always tell people, if you're going someplace, don't say, oh, I've got to get back to my hotel room and because I have 300 emails. Take that time, even if you have jet lag and you're exhausted, to go and make sure that you have the meal with the people and to do those different things. So I think that's an important, I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, Jerem, but I think that the other piece is, and it's really, I mean, I think that, Mary, you said before, we're humans, right? Yeah, we have profound differences in who we are, but what are those points of connection that you can find with somebody? No matter what their background is, no matter where they're from, their language, their generation, their gender, whatever it may be, their religion, what are some of the things that you can find in common? I remember when my daughter was 2 years old, we were in Turkey. And she was running around with this other little girl, and her mother was completely in the holabaya. I could only see her eyes. We didn't have a common language. And we were just, as moms, we were just connecting, and we were just sort of like pointing at our daughters and trying to, I mean, that was a momentary connection. It was probably not going to go deeper, but what are those things that you can connect on with people? And I think that we can always find that, being a parent or, being a human or whatever it may be, and use that as a starting point. And then to your other question in terms of sustainability, I mean, I would say there's the material resources that are needed, and that's different, although that goes hand in hand too. If you're looking for donors and whatnot, is again building that relationship and continuing to nurture that relationship. Does that answer your question?
Thank you so much. I'm really satisfied with your responses. I actually, at the moment, I write a book, The Human Cost of a Warming World, where culture interplay a lot. So probably I can invite you as a co-author.
Have a right, maybe a forward.
That's an important topic. Wow, I definitely would love to hear more about your book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Victor, back to you for your other question.
So, Julia, so I have a question particularly tied to like AML, anti-corruption. And what I've found is, from a global standpoint, when you see the issues going on with a country, let's just use, we can just use Nigeria, where, the corruption was not necessarily, people label it that, but really what you saw was, countries in the EU or, companies from the United States that were really the root of that. And when you think about like the regulations and why they're tied to that, such as the remittance payment, the reviews, the payment systems, those parts where businesses may put out deregulation, when people understand that your everyday folks why that's important, how much have you seen that? And in those instances of the knowledge base of the connectivity of these regulations are there, whether it's financial systems and that, and how much effort or points are you doing, like working alongside the educational side of why even a banking regulation is so important and essential to their everyday life, where it makes human trafficking harder, but the documentation to get a bank account may be cumbersome as well.
Yeah. So I can't really address that in terms of regulation. That's not really my area of knowledge or expertise, but I think that I can address maybe different points. Is I think that, we oftentimes make assumptions, right? That people will understand, that regulations in one country might be the same, and that's practice. And it kind of comes into how we view ethics as well, right? Which I'll address afterwards. But I think that from a cultural standpoint, that explanation is really, really important. We forget that people there don't understand what is done here and vice versa. So we go in and we don't always know how to articulate that, like the reasons why. I think a lot of my work is not just saying do this and don't do that, because as far as I'm concerned, that goes in one ear and that comes out another. But it's more about understanding the deeper historical political, economic, educational, whatever it may be, context of why something is in place, why a regulation is in place, why a law is in place, why a policy is in place. Now, from a cultural standpoint, and this is where it comes in, is our application of them. Okay. There's in some of our research that's done, we look at what we call particularist, or we look at universalist applications of rules, regulations, whatnot. And that can, for some people, cross what we call the ethical boundaries. Okay. And that's a whole other topic in terms of that, bartering, bargaining, whatever it is, bribery, whatever, that's looked at from different cultural perspectives. But in my work, we address that a lot because, let's say, for example, that, and I think one of the questions by the theorist who came up with this talked about when you go to, something very simplistic, you stop at a traffic light. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. There's no traffic there and you're sitting at a traffic light. Do you sit at that traffic light for 5 minutes because it's red and you're not going to go because that's the law and that's the rule? Or do you look around and you say, oh, nobody's here, I'm just going to go right through it? Okay. I mean, that's a sort of a simplistic explanation of it, but I think it really highlights, how we necessarily apply that. And this is really important because there's a lot of different cultures that have different expressions and different words. Like in Brazil, there's jeitinho. Jeitinho is sort of like, how do we kind of build that relationship and kind of get around this situation, right? So a lot of it's, again, coming back to Jerim's question, it's about relationship building. It's about, how do we navigate something and make it better because there's this bureaucracy, because there's this regulation or this rule that's in place. And we know that we have to get from point A to point B, and we're not going to do it because of all of this bureaucracy or whatever it may be. How do we navigate that? And that's where I think the more particularist approach comes in, because it's, what's my relationship? How can I, you scratch my back, I scratch yours type of thing. So jeitinho, like in Italy, c'est l'arte di arrangiarsi, the art of arranging things, or system D in France. I mean, that's just 3 examples, but there's many different cultural terms and perspectives of doing that if you don't understand this, and I see this showing up in work a lot, working with teams, for example, or people say, well, let's just do it this way. No, we have to apply it. The rules is this, and this is what we have to do. Yeah. So I don't know if this answers your question specifically, but I think that from a cultural context, it's important to recognize that, because we might see things in some way. We might not say we like a regulation, but that's the way it is. That's the rule of law and we follow it. And that might not necessarily be applied in the same place in another cultural context.
You have answered it like 100%. Like, and I am really bad at being fake. So yeah, it has, because I just recently had a TEDx as well, book as well. It's called No Ethics, No Accountability, and that is that part of misunderstanding and conceptualizing, where you use the word particularist, and how we see the rules and versus rule breakers, or just people who go around them, and our understanding how we conceptualize and apply it is really just how we as people, just not just countries internationally, here in the United States, applies it, and how we're able to either deny it. Because in the other part too, we've called it as system thinkers versus label thinkers. And we're
rule makers, rule breakers.
Rule makers and a rule breakers.
Just putting the title of the book in the chat box that's written by a woman who actually used to be a neighbor, taught at University of Maryland, but called Rule Makers and Rule Breakers, which I think might be of interest to you to read. It's a cultural book, but it really addresses that.
And what is the other word you said? What, particularist versus that?
Universalist.
Versus universalist.
Yeah. And that's a term that was coined by Frontrunners. If you ever read his book, Riding the Waves of Culture, he's kind of a grandfather in the intercultural field, and he was the one who kind of came up with that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
She's like an encyclopedia here.
Yeah. So that's
all kinds of. We got new words now. We have new words.
Yeah.
Right.
This is great. I want to flip it a little bit, if it's okay. In the last couple of minutes, Julia, do you have a question for these young people?
Oh my goodness! I mean, I think how much time do we have? Do we have another?
I know it's only a couple of minutes, so it would have to be very, very quick round.
Yeah.
I don't think Tobias is with us anymore, but so it's just what we see here. But.
Well, I think I do. I mean, I know that you're all working and doing amazing, extraordinary work within your communities and things, but I'm wondering what cross-cultural challenges you're facing in your work. I'll keep it very simple.
Who's up? Sadia's thinking, I can see that. Jerem, what comes up in I think you've expressed it via question, but if you got, look at you grinning, go ahead.
And I also want to just say that, we can also look at socioeconomics. I mean, you're talking about working with underprivileged youth and everything. I mean, that's also a cultural difference, right? So however you want to define culture.
Okay, maybe I know time is
Okay.
running up, but what I can say is that the biggest challenge that we have is social exclusion in terms of cultures. So that is the biggest problem that we so far face as a community.
I've done a lot of work in, which is now kind of defunct here in the United States, but in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we talk a lot about insider outsider dynamics. And I think that that's a really, really important one in the workplace with teams. Is as humans, we're social animals. We want that sense of belonging. But what that does to people, that social exclusion, especially in a work context, in terms of productivity, performance, motivation, contribution. I mean, it's very critical. So yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. I was also just going to add very quickly. I think in my context, because I'm an immigrant, so I could see a lot of social exclusion in terms of the system. So systems that are meant to support people in the workforce. Say, for example, I'm an immigrant, as I mentioned. For me to get into a particular job, I need to have work authorization. And there are other bureaucracy that goes into this. And because they need to put that in check, it makes the challenge not just for me, for other immigrants also to get into the job market, because we need to bring different documents, and this is part of the system. And indirectly, that system is excluding this group of people, immigrant, to get into jobs, making it a challenge for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, that's such a huge challenge. I mean, I haven't done an enormous amount of work with immigrants, but I mean, even just understanding the systems, and people being able to even explain to you what that is. And I'll just give a very, very quick synopsis. I know we don't have a lot of time, but when we were living in Ecuador, I was going every single day to the Ministry of Education because we put our daughter in a local Ecuadorian school that had a whole different system of learning. And I was there every day, and I knew the questions to ask because I'm an interculturalist. And everybody was just saying, well, it's just this way, it's just normal. And nobody was giving me a satisfactory response to what I needed. And so, that frustration, and I speak Spanish and I have the language that I use and I have all of that. So I really understand, especially around bureaucracies, how to navigate that and move those barriers. So thank you for sharing that.
Victor.
Yes. One of the greatest challenges right now is for me is, facing the space of scarcity thinking, where, I work together with, being American, also along with multiple cultural groups, and I use white men, Black men, Caucasian, and, the constant theme is a fear of losing what, maybe they feel like they're already losing, already have. And where the scarcity mindset is that we're interconnected society where immigrants, people do well. Like, so look, I'm selfish. Like they would say I'm too nice, but I say, look, I'm really selfish. I selfishly want to see you do well, because when you do well, I do well. So that mindset of that team connectivity is that, but they feel they're losing, and they are. There are men who are in the United States have a high rate of suicide in this country that is skyrocketing, and a lot of it is loss of economic power that has been trickled down, but that's more of a generational part. But that scarcity has created the nationalism, where it sure goes back to Sadia's part, where it may be harder for her as a immigrant to do, or, migrate and to get that, as well as Jerome, where, the exclusion happens because of ultimately it's the scarcity mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's further propagated too, by the media, by politics, and all of that. So yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been so much. I wish we had a lot more time. I feel like
I know.
And I really appreciate you bringing us together, Mary.
But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all of the Youth Commons panelists. Thank you, Julia, for spending so much time and all your expertise to share with us. It's been wonderful. It's been enlightening. It's been educational for all of us, me included. So thank you, everyone. I can't wait to share this broadly. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary. Bye-bye.